When Barron Trump stepped into a posh Los Angeles restaurant, he had no idea that his signature MAGA hat would ignite a heated confrontation. What followed was so unexpected that it not only startled the restaurant manager, but also became the talk of the entire city. The afternoon was picture perfect, a warm, sunny day in Los Angeles that begged everyone to slow down and soak in the moment. Barron, now a teenager with a calm and composed demeanor, had spent his morning quietly indulging in a good book. Feeling the need to reward himself, he decided to have lunch at Terrasse, a celebrated establishment famous for its blend of elegance and exclusivity. It was the type of place where every table seemed to host a tale, whether from a celebrity, a CEO, or a social media star. Barron had dined there before and always appreciated its tranquil ambiance and flawless service. As Barron stepped through the sleek glass doors of the restaurant, he immediately drew attention, not just because of his tall and striking figure, but because of the unmistakable red MAGA hat perched confidently on his head. He wore it naturally with the quiet assurance of someone simply expressing themselves, not aiming to stir controversy or provoke reactions. The hostess, a poised woman in her mid-30s, greeted him with a polished smile and guided him to a quiet corner table. The restaurant had a calm, refined atmosphere, with only a handful of diners sipping wine and speaking in hushed tones. Barron sat down and picked up the menu, his gaze focused as he calmly scanned for his favorite dish. At first, he didn't notice the subtle attention he was drawing. A man at the next table leaned toward his partner, gesturing discreetly in Barron's direction. Meanwhile, a few staff members near the bar exchanged whispers, stealing glances toward his table. Then, without warning, the manager appeared, a sharp-looking man in his mid-40s, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit. His stride was purposeful, and his expression was firm, as though he had made up his mind about what needed to be done. "Excuse me," the manager began, his voice firm and loud enough to turn a few heads. "We have a strict policy against political apparel here. I'm going to have to ask you to remove your hat." Barron looked up, startled by the confrontation but remaining composed. He calmly removed his earbuds and placed them neatly on the table. "I wasn't aware of any such policy," he replied in an even tone. His voice carried a quiet strength, respectful yet unyielding. The manager gestured vaguely toward the entrance. "It's outlined in our code of conduct," he insisted, his expression unwavering. "We aim to keep this space neutral for all our guests." Barron tilted his head slightly, considering his options. His eyes scanned the room, noting how some diners pretended to ignore the scene while others openly stared, intrigued by the unfolding drama. "I'm not looking to cause any trouble," he said calmly. "I just came here for lunch." The manager's stance grew more rigid, his tone firm. "You need to remove the hat, or I'll have to ask you to leave." For a brief moment, Barron sat in thoughtful silence, his expression betraying nothing. Then, with a slight nod, he quietly stood up and gathered his belongings. "If that's your decision," he said in a measured tone, "then I'll leave." A heavy silence fell over the restaurant as Barron pushed his chair back and walked toward the exit, leaving his glass of water untouched. The soft click of the door as he stepped outside did little to dispel the thick tension that now hung in the air like a lingering storm cloud. Stepping outside into the bright afternoon sunlight, Barron paused to collect himself. The warm California breeze played gently against his face, and for a moment he simply stood there, taking it in. He adjusted his hat slightly as though reaffirming his decision to wear it with quiet confidence. He wasn't angry. Frustration simmered beneath the surface. But more than anything, a sense of disappointment settled over him. He had been raised to believe in treating others with kindness, even when opinions clashed. This encounter felt like a breach of that fundamental value, leaving him with an unexpected weight on his shoulders. Back inside the restaurant, the atmosphere was tense. Quiet murmurs spread among the remaining patrons, their eyes darting toward the corner table Barron had vacated. A waiter, hesitant but curious, leaned toward the manager and whispered, "Do you think that was a good idea? That's him." The manager brushed off the comment with a dismissive wave. "We can't make exceptions," he said curtly. "If we let him stay, it sends the wrong message. This is my restaurant, and I'll run it the way I see fit." His words were firm, but a hint of unease flickered across his face as he returned to his duties. The decision, though resolute, was beginning to cast a long shadow over the once composed dining room. Barron strolled a few blocks away from the restaurant, his thoughts swirling as he sought a moment of calm. Reaching a quiet public park, he spotted an empty bench shaded by a cluster of trees and decided to sit down. Pulling out his phone, he began typing. First, he messaged his mother, explaining the situation in a straightforward manner. Then, he sent a few texts to close friends, seeking their perspectives. Barron wasn't fishing for pity or validation. He genuinely wanted clarity. Had he overreacted? Was the manager within his rights to enforce such a policy? The responses came quickly. One friend replied, "That's ridiculous. They had no right to treat you that way." Another chimed in, "You handled it way better than I would have. I'd still be fuming." As he read through the messages, Barron's thoughts shifted. He realized he had no interest in stirring up more negativity or creating a public spectacle. Revenge wasn't on his mind. Instead, an idea began to take shape, something bigger, something purposeful. If he was going to respond, it would be with an action that mattered, something that could turn the uncomfortable encounter into an opportunity for growth and understanding. With a renewed sense of purpose, Barron stood up from the park bench, his eyes filled with quiet determination. He began making calls, his voice steady but resolute as he laid out his vision. "I need your help with something," he said confidently into the phone. This was just the first of many conversations that would breathe life into the idea forming in his mind. A plan to turn an unpleasant moment into something impactful. Meanwhile, back at LA Terrace, the mood had grown tense. The incident was already starting to ripple beyond the confines of the dining room. Diners who had witnessed the interaction began sharing their versions of events online. Posts started to appear on social media, some accompanied by blurry photos of Barron leaving the restaurant. "They kicked out Barron Trump because of his hat," one post read. Another questioned, "So much for freedom of expression at LA Terrasse." Behind the bar, the manager scrolled through his phone, his brows furrowed as he read the growing number of comments. The reaction was swift and polarized. Some defended the restaurant's right to enforce its policies, but others were sharply critical. "Let them talk," he muttered under his breath, attempting to maintain his composure. Yet, a nagging sense of regret was creeping in. He couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was slipping out of his control. And fast. By the time Barron arrived home, the incident had already taken on a life of its own online. Social media was buzzing with posts from those who had been at the restaurant, as well as opinions from others who had caught wind of the story. Local influencers began weighing in, their captions veering from supportive to sharply critical. Barron skimmed through the posts but chose not to linger on them. He had no interest in adding fuel to the fire or stoking further division. Instead, his thoughts turned toward a solution, something constructive that could redirect the narrative into a force for good. Settling at his desk, he opened a small leather-bound notebook and began writing. His pen moved deliberately as he reflected on the events of the day. The tense conversation with the manager, the whispered reactions of the other diners, and the unspoken judgments he had felt throughout the encounter. What could he do to address this sense of divisiveness? How could he transform it into an opportunity to foster dialogue and understanding? Then, as if the idea had been waiting for him all along, it struck. A public fundraiser. Not just any event, but one with a powerful and unifying message. Barron envisioned creating a platform to support underprivileged communities, while emphasizing the importance of open conversations and mutual respect. The idea was bold, yet deeply personal, and it felt like exactly the right response. Without wasting another moment, Barron reached for his phone and made a call. His voice was calm but carried a sense of urgency. "Hi, this is Barron Trump," he began, his tone purposeful. "I need some advice on setting up a charity event. It's urgent. Can we meet tomorrow?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, likely from surprise, but the person quickly agreed. Satisfied, Barron ended the call and returned to his notebook, fleshing out his vision for the event. The more he thought about it, the clearer the plan became. The fundraiser would take place right outside LA Terrace, the very location of the confrontation. It was the perfect setting to send a powerful message. Even in places where conflict arises, unity and understanding can take root. He called a trusted friend to help with the logistics, and together they began outlining the steps needed to bring the idea to life. Within hours, the plan was already in motion, and Barron's determination only grew stronger. Meanwhile, over at LA Terrace, the fallout was growing harder to ignore. What had started as a tense exchange in the dining room was now a public spectacle. The manager's decision had spilled into a heated debate online, with news outlets picking up the story and sharing eyewitness accounts. Some articles portrayed Barron as the target of intolerance, while others framed the restaurant's actions as an exercise of its right to enforce its own policies. The restaurant's social media pages quickly became a battleground for divided opinions. Comments flooded in by the minute. Some users applauded the manager for taking a stand, but others weren't as forgiving. Calls for boycotts began to circulate, with critics accusing the restaurant of hypocrisy. One particularly cutting comment read, "So much for being a neutral space. Kicking someone out isn't neutrality, it's taking a side." The growing backlash left the staff uneasy, and even the manager, who had been steadfast in his decision earlier, began to feel the weight of the controversy. The unease at LA Terrace was impossible to ignore. Staff members exchanged worried glances as the usual flow of customers began to dwindle. Regular patrons, who typically filled the restaurant's tables weeks in advance, were now canceling reservations. The dining room, once vibrant and lively, had grown noticeably quieter, with empty tables casting long, awkward shadows across the space. The manager, who had initially stood by his decision with conviction, began to wrestle with doubt. Though he told himself the controversy would blow over in a few days, the mounting pressure from both online criticism and the dwindling business gnawed at him. Deep down, he started to wonder if he had made the wrong call. Meanwhile, as the evening descended into night, Barron was deep in preparation. Sitting at his desk, he went over every detail of his plan for the fundraiser. He wasn't naive. He knew this event wouldn't completely erase the incident or satisfy everyone, but his hope was that it could shift the narrative away from division and toward something meaningful. The world didn't need more arguments, he thought. What it desperately needed was connection, even if it had to come from the unlikeliest of places. By the next morning, the once quiet block outside LA Terrace was alive with activity. Trucks rolled up, unloading equipment as volunteers bustled about, setting up tables, chairs, and a compact but elegant stage. Barron stood in the middle of it all, his presence calm but purposeful, as he oversaw every detail of the arrangements. Above the stage, a large banner unfurled, its bold lettering sending a clear message. "United we stand, building bridges, not walls." Barron's outreach had been deliberate and thoughtful. He connected with several organizations dedicated to community building, youth mentorship, and fostering open dialogue. Their enthusiastic support added energy and depth to the event. The fundraiser wasn't just about collecting donations, it was about creating a welcoming space where people from all backgrounds could come together, talk, and share experiences. The transformation of the block was remarkable. Food trucks lined the curb, offering delicious options to attendees, while local musicians began tuning up for live performances. Booths run by various charities dotted the sidewalk, their displays brimming with information and opportunities for involvement. What had once been the site of a confrontation was now turning into a lively and inclusive community hub. By midday, a diverse and growing crowd began to fill the area outside LA Terrace. Families arrived with curious children in tow, while young professionals mingled with activists and community leaders. Even a few social media influencers made an appearance, drawn by the buzz surrounding the event. The energy was electric, and the atmosphere brimmed with anticipation as people waited to see what would unfold. When Barron finally took the stage, a hush fell over the gathering. Holding the microphone with steady hands, he began to speak. His voice was calm but carried a raw sincerity that captured the audience's attention immediately. "Yesterday, I was asked to leave this restaurant because of a hat," he said, his tone measured but resolute. "That's okay. I respect their policies, even if I don't agree with them. But what struck me most wasn't being asked to leave. It was the bigger picture. We've become so quick to judge one another, to take sides, and to shut down conversations. That's not who we are. We can do better." The crowd responded with a wave of applause, their cheers echoing down the block. Barron paused for a moment, letting the noise settle before continuing. "This event isn't about me, and it's not about them," he said, gesturing toward the restaurant behind him. "It's about all of us, finding ways to listen, to understand, and to come together. Every dollar we raise today will go toward programs that promote dialogue and inclusion. Thank you for being here and proving that unity is stronger than division." The applause this time was thunderous, filled with admiration and support. As Barron stepped off the stage, he was met with handshakes, smiles, and words of encouragement. His composed demeanor and heartfelt message left a profound impression on everyone present. Many who had arrived out of curiosity now found themselves genuinely moved, inspired to take the message of unity into their own lives. Inside LA Terrace, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different from the lively event taking place just outside. The manager stood by the window, his arms crossed tightly, watching the fundraiser unfold. He hadn't anticipated this kind of response from Barron, and the sheer positivity of the gathering made him feel uneasy. A part of him couldn't help but admire the initiative, though it was a bitter pill to swallow. Several staff members, drawn by the upbeat music and the growing energy outside, had quietly slipped out to join the fundraiser. Their absence didn't go unnoticed. One of the waiters who had witnessed the previous day's confrontation returned inside and approached the bar. Lowering his voice, he said to the manager, "You should go out there. Talk to him." The manager straightened, his jaw tightening defensively. "This isn't my fight," he replied, his tone clipped and resolute. The waiter hesitated for a moment before responding, his words calm but pointed. "Maybe not," he said, "but it's definitely your chance." The manager said nothing, his gaze shifting back toward the window. Outside, the crowd was growing, their faces lit with optimism and unity. The words lingered in his mind, weighing heavier with each passing moment. As the hours passed, Barron's fundraiser became a sensation, not just in the immediate neighborhood, but across the city. Social media lit up with photos, live-streamed videos, and posts tagged with "Number Building Bridges" and "Number United We Stand." The messages poured in, praising Barron's maturity and the constructive tone of his event. The buzz quickly spread, attracting more than just local supporters. News crews arrived to cover the unfolding story, their cameras capturing the vibrant atmosphere and Barron's impactful speeches. Meanwhile, inside LA Terrace, the mood was somber. The dining room, once the epicenter of bustling activity, now felt strangely empty. Tables that would typically be booked weeks in advance remained untouched. The few customers who did trickle in seemed preoccupied, casting curious glances out the window toward the event. It was as though the fundraiser had become the real focal point of the day, leaving the restaurant in its shadow. The manager moved between tasks, his mind clouded by the growing weight of the situation. The tension among his staff was palpable. Even those who had stayed inside couldn't resist stealing glimpses at the event through the windows, their curiosity and admiration impossible to hide. The manager struggled to maintain his composure, but deep down he couldn't ignore the sinking realization. Something about this wasn't going away. A server hesitated near the bar before approaching the manager cautiously. "Some of the customers have been asking about the event," they said quietly. "They're saying it looks amazing, and maybe we should go out there." The manager's jaw tensed at the suggestion, and for a moment he said nothing. Without a word, he turned and walked toward his office. Closing the door behind him, he sank into his chair and stared at his computer screen, the notifications piling up faster than he could process. His inbox was a minefield of complaints, messages from discontented customers, notices of canceled reservations, and a handful of sharp critiques from local media outlets. One email, however, stood out from the rest. It was from a longtime regular, someone the manager had always considered a loyal supporter of the restaurant. The subject line read, "Deeply disappointed." With a sinking feeling, he opened it and read the message. "I've always loved LA Terrace, but what happened yesterday was incredibly disappointing. Kicking someone out for their personal beliefs doesn't reflect the neutrality you claim to uphold. It's divisive. I truly hope you'll find a way to make this right." The words stung more than the manager expected. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. Was he wrong? Had his decision really been about creating a neutral space, or had it been driven by something else, something he didn't want to admit even to himself? The questions lingered, leaving him with no easy answers. Outside, the fundraiser was in full swing, brimming with life and energy. A local jazz band filled the air with upbeat melodies, their music creating a vibrant backdrop for the event. Children giggled as they painted colorful murals at an art booth, while adults mingled near donation boxes that were quickly filling to the brim. The sense of community was undeniable, and the positive energy seemed to grow with every passing minute. Barron moved seamlessly through the crowd, engaging with attendees in his quiet but confident way. He shook hands, listened attentively to people's stories, and even posed for a few photos with supporters. His presence wasn't flashy or forced. It carried a genuine warmth that resonated with everyone around him. The calm assurance he radiated came not from arrogance, but from the knowledge that this event was making a real difference. It was clear that Barron believed in what he was doing, and that belief was contagious. As the golden hues of the setting sun bathed the fundraiser in a warm glow, a ripple of quiet excitement passed through the crowd. Heads turned toward the restaurant's entrance, where the manager had just stepped out. His steps were hesitant, and he adjusted his tie nervously, glancing at the lively scene before him. For a moment he lingered on the steps, as if debating whether to proceed. Then, with a deep breath, he began making his way toward Barron. The crowd instinctively parted to make way, their chatter falling to a hush as they watched the two figures approach one another. There was a palpable tension in the air, but it wasn't hostile. It was expectant, as if something important was about to happen. Barron noticed the manager's approach and met his gaze with a small, polite smile. He stood his ground, calm and composed, and when the manager came closer, Barron extended his hand in a gesture of respect. The manager hesitated, his expression unreadable, but after a brief pause, he reached out and shook Barron's hand. "I'd like to talk," the manager said softly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the crowd. "Of course," Barron replied, his tone steady and welcoming. With a small nod, he gestured toward a quieter spot near the edge of the event where they could speak in private. The two walked side by side, their steps measured as the crowd watched silently, curiosity etched on every face. Though no one followed, the onlookers maintained a respectful distance, their attention fixed on the unexpected exchange. At the far edge of the event, where the lively music and animated conversations softened into the background, Barron and the manager stopped. The manager's demeanor, usually confident and controlled, seemed uncharacteristically uncertain. His eyes darted briefly toward the gathering behind them before settling on Barron. He took a breath, and his shoulders seemed to sag slightly under an invisible weight. "I need to start by admitting I didn't handle things well yesterday," the manager began, his voice quiet but sincere. "I thought I was doing what was best for the restaurant, for my staff, but I realize now that I made a mistake. I judged you, and I acted out of fear, not fairness." Barron listened without interruption, his expression steady and reassuring. When the manager finished, Barron gave a small nod, his tone thoughtful yet warm. "It takes a lot of courage to admit when you're wrong," he said sincerely. "Thank you for acknowledging that." The manager let out a slow, relieved breath, his posture loosening slightly, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. "Watching what you've done here today, it's honestly humbling," he admitted, his voice tinged with a mix of gratitude and regret. "You could have retaliated. You could have used this as an opportunity to publicly attack my business, but instead, you turned it into something positive. That's rare. Most people wouldn't have done what you did." Barron offered a faint but genuine smile. "I don't think the world needs any more anger or division," he replied calmly. "What happened yesterday could have easily added to all the noise, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted to show that there's a better way to respond." The manager nodded, his expression softening further. "You succeeded," he said, his tone more assured now. "And I want to support what you're doing here. If there's any way I, or the restaurant, can help, I'd like to." Barron paused, taking a moment to think before replying. "I think the best way to contribute is to reflect on how we treat one another," he said thoughtfully. "Policies have their place, but they should never come at the cost of kindness and understanding. Maybe LA Terrace could host an event like this one, a gathering that brings people together instead of driving them apart." The manager blinked, momentarily taken aback by the suggestion. He hadn't expected such a constructive and forward-thinking idea. Slowly, a small smile began to form on his face. "I think that's a fantastic idea," he said, nodding in agreement. "Let's do it. Let's make it happen." They shook hands once more, but this time the gesture was infused with genuine warmth and mutual respect. The crowd, which had been watching the interaction closely, seemed to sense the resolution. A wave of applause rippled through the gathering, but it wasn't just polite or performative. It was heartfelt, a recognition of the significance of what had just transpired. As the event began to wind down, Barron stepped onto the stage one final time, his presence commanding the crowd's attention. He took a moment to look out at the faces gathered before him, his expression filled with gratitude. With a steady voice, he delivered his closing remarks. "We all make mistakes," he began, his tone measured but impactful. "What truly matters is how we choose to grow from them. Today wasn't just about raising money. It was about proving that even when we disagree, we can find common ground. Thank you for being here today and showing that unity isn't just possible, it's essential." The crowd responded with thunderous applause and cheers, their voices ringing out with hope and enthusiasm. The sense of accomplishment and connection was palpable, and the energy lingered even as the sun dipped below the Los Angeles skyline, casting the block in a warm, golden glow. As the event came to a close, Barron stood with his close friends and family, quietly taking in the scene. He watched as the attendees began to trickle out, their steps lighter and their expressions thoughtful. They weren't just leaving with memories of a successful event. They were carrying with them the powerful message it represented. This story serves as a poignant reminder that conflicts, no matter how big or small, don't have to lead to bitterness or division. When we approach challenges with grace, empathy, and a willingness to seek solutions, we create opportunities for deeper understanding and meaningful connection. Even the most difficult moments can become catalysts for growth and bridges toward a more united future.